Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. This is my third Thomas Hardy novel. I've also read Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Far from the Madding Crowds. I've also had a chance to visit the cottage he was born in Dorset. And yet, this was the very first Thomas Hardy book I owned. I first got this book when I was 14 for a literature class, which we didn't end up covering the book that year. This was just in our required purchases. But I attempted to read it anyway over the summer, and I got as far as page 22 or so. I just was not mature enough or intelligent enough to read Thomas Hardy at 14 or 15. That's just what I have to admit. So much description of the landscape, and it didn't have enough narrative urgency for the 14 or 15-year-old version of myself. And now I luxuriate in reading a Thomas Hardy novel, very enjoyable, and so often, as I've shared with different selections on this channel, Hardy has the ability to make you feel very inadequate as a writer. You'll read something you think, I could never possibly in a million years write something as beautiful as that. And Hardy is an example of being able to take pleasure in your own language. Those of you who are not native English speakers, I'm sure you experience this when reading great writers in your own native language, how well they use the texture of the language and how expressive it is, and you think that is how English is meant to be written. And Hardy does that very well. So I want to read you some of those passages and then talk to you a little bit about, you could say, my big takeaways and thoughts on this novel. Won't be, as before, a traditional review. I know some people want that they'll find this video and hope that I can give them a review to help them with their book report. I promise you there are much better reviews than mine on YouTube. But if you want to hear some more about the writing and some opinions about the direction of the novel, keep listening. While you're doing so, maybe hit like and subscribe. Here at least were intelligible facts regarding landscape, far-reaching proofs productive of genuine satisfaction. The untamable Ishmaelitish thing that Egdon now was, it always had been. Civilization was its enemy, and ever since the beginning of vegetation, its soil had worn the same antique brown dress, the natural and invariable garment of the particular formation. In its venerable one coat lay a certain vein of satire on human vanity in clothes. A person on a heath in raiment of modern cut and colors has more or less an anomalous look. We seem to want the oldest and simplest human clothing, where the clothing of the earth is so primitive. And that might be the only time I've seen Ishmael turned into an adjective, Ishmaelitish. Now they're talking here. Hardy is talking about the bonfires that were lit for the 5th of November, which is called Guy Fawkes Day in England. Guy Fawkes, which was a false flag, which we can save for a different discussion and a different review. But here, the evocative nature of the fires all throughout the heath. And the heath is very much a character in this novel. In a way, we'd see the house being a character in Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. And to much effect. While the men and lads were building the pile, a change took place in the mass of shade which denoted the distant landscape. Red suns and tufts of fire, one by one, began to arise, flecking the whole country round. They were the bonfires of other parishes and hamlets that were engaged in the same sort of commemoration. Some were distant and stood in a dense atmosphere, so that bundles of pale straw-like beams radiated around them in the shape of a fan. Some were large and near, glowing scarlet red from the shade, like wounds in a black hide. Some were Maenades, with whiny faces and blown hair. These tinctured the silent bosom of the clouds above them and lit up their ephemeral caves, which seemed thenceforth to become scalding cauldrons. I mean, just that sentence alone. These tinctured the silent bosom of the clouds above them, and lit up their ephemeral caves, which seemed thenceforth to become scalding cauldrons. He is so granular in his detail and so painterly in his description that you can see all of the shades that he sees. And I tell you, if you go to Dorset, you can understand why Thomas Hardy was so in love with nature. So beautiful down there. Perhaps as much as 30 bonfires could be counted within the whole bounds of the district, and as the hour may be told on a clock face, when the figures themselves are invisible, so did the men recognize the locality of each fire by its angle and direction, though nothing of the scenery could be viewed. Moreover, to light a fire is the instinctive and resistant act of man when, at the winter ingress, the curfew is sounded throughout nature. It indicates a spontaneous Promethean rebelliousness against the fiat that this recurrent season shall bring foul times, cold darkness, misery, and death. Black chaos comes, and the fettered gods of the earth say, "Let there be light." Now, in this allusion to paganism, which Hardy evokes in the lighting of the fires themselves, we see a theme recurrent throughout the novel. I would say more than a theme, it's a motif. We see it grow and grow. This idea of the wildness of this nature against civilization, against taming these wild impulses, and how do we, as civilized humans, and you could say particularly as Christians, which is only very lightly alluded to here in the novel, at the lightness of Protestant England, the idea of bending our own inclinations to proper discipline and saying that is a wild impulse I have. I should not follow it just because I have it. I should tame those wild impulses. But it's always there, and the heath represents that wildness, and it builds within the locality, even among these, you could say, very calm country folk. And here, so now that I've given you some descriptions of the heath and what Hardy was commenting on regards nature, here are some of his takes upon our humanity. Yeobright was unwilling to disturb this idea, though his scheme was far enough removed from one wherein the education of youth should be made a mere channel of social ascent. He had no desires of that sort. He had reached the stage in a young man's life when the grimness of the general human situation first becomes clear, and the realization of this causes ambition to halt a while. In France, it is not uncustomary to commit suicide at this stage. In England, we do much better, or much worse, as the case may be. So just commenting on the choice of life and obviously having a bit of fun with it. Yeobright placed his hand upon her arm. "Now don't you suppose, my inexperienced girl, that I cannot rebel in high Promethean fashion against the gods and fate as well as you. I have felt more steam and smoke of that sort than you have ever heard of. But the more I see of life, the more do I perceive that there is nothing particularly great in its greatest walks, and therefore nothing particularly small in mine of furze cutting. If I feel that the greatest blessings vouchsafed to us are not very valuable, how can I feel it to be any great hardship when they are taken away? So I sing to pass the time. Have you indeed lost all tenderness for me that you begrudge me a few cheerful moments?" So I just want to pause here for a moment to set the scene that may seem unintelligible otherwise. So Yeobright, our native, the return of the native here refers to Yeobright, although one interpretation could say that it refers to another character. But I'm going to stick with the traditional one. Yeobright has planned to start a school and has been studying late at night, but he has been studying so intensely that his eyes have gotten injured, and he's had to keep them covered for a while for them to recover. And rather than sit at home and do nothing, he's gone out to cut furs, which would be like doing landscaping work in today's world. So I want you to think his wife, he's in a bad marriage, more on that in a moment, begrudges this to him. And because he is singing while he's working, in the sense of, how could you be happy doing this demeaning work? I, who deserve to be the wife of, someone wonderful, and here you are doing this demeaning work, and you're singing while you're doing it. How dare you, effectively? And Yeobright gives a very, I think, calm answer, and a good one too. You can rewind and look at what he says if you want to reflect on it more. But that notion of not being too proud to take on work, that yes, I'm not able to be employed in what I'd like to do, but I'm willing to take on work because there's a dignity in work. And if I'm going to work, why not sing while doing it? Wonderful attitude, and brought out in just this small, tiny paragraph. The last citation I'll read is from one of the last moments of one of the characters in this novel. But because you don't know that as the reader when you're reading it, it might be missed otherwise, or it might be taken as part of the scene. And Hardy, I think, does this knowingly. He's going to take you by surprise, and so he's leaving you with this very beautiful observation, beautiful moment in the meantime. So this character is walking home. In 2 hours, she reached a slope about 3/4 the whole distance from Alderworth to her own home, where a little patch of shepherd's thyme intruded upon the path, and she sat down upon the perfumed mat it formed there. In front of her, a colony of ants had established a thoroughfare across the way, where they toiled a never-ending and heavy-laden throng. To look down upon them was like observing a city street from the top of a tower. She remembered that this bustle of ants had been in progress for years at the same spot. Doubtless those of the old times were the ancestors of these which walk there now. She leant back to obtain more thorough rest, and the soft eastern portion of the sky was as great a relief to her eyes as the time was to her head. And here time, Thyme. While she looked, a heron arose on that side of the sky and flew on with his face towards the sun. He had come dripping wet from some pool in the valleys, and as he flew, the edges and lining of his wings, his thighs, and his breast were so caught by the bright sunbeams that he appeared as if formed of burnished silver. Up in the zenith, where he was, seemed a free and happy place, away from all contact with the earthly ball to which she was pinioned, and she wished that she could arise uncrushed from its surface and fly as he flew then. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, so now that I've given you a taste of his quality and meditated upon nature and among some of his sketches of character, what does the Return of the Native offer to you? And now I bring back those of you who are trolling to get help writing book reports, whether you're in high school or college. The two things that I would focus on are perhaps more personal reflections than literature ones, but I think they can matter too, because marrying correctly is an obsession that we see within Victorian writing. We'd see it in Austen. We see it in the Bronte sisters. We've seen it in Hardy, actually. We think about Tess of the D'Urbervilles. We think of Far from the Madding Crowd. And here, among the 3 novels that I've read of his, the importance of making a good marriage is not lost on Hardy. And he's communicating that, I think, to us. Now, is there a model marriage given to us in the text? No. But what is clear is that there are 2 bad marriages, one not so bad as the other, that are presented, and both are opposed by the same mother. One strongly opposed at the beginning, but then when she sees that she could not have it go another way, she then resolves to support it. And another, there's strong opposition, and it's never really resolved within the novel. I'm going to leave that for there. So what Hardy is telling us, and what I'm going to share from my own personal reflections, is that your family's thoughts on who you should marry are not to be lightly discarded. And I think that's just a lesson those of us who are too stupid to know that have to learn the hard way when we're younger. That I can recall when I was dating somebody who nobody in my family liked this person, nobody among my friends liked her, and yet they didn't really say anything. Maybe they just expressed their displeasure, but it turned out they were right about her. And I won't go into how that was found out, but it took that for me to finally realize my family only has my best interest at heart. It doesn't mean that they're only objective when they give their thoughts on someone that I'm seeing, but they're certainly more objective than I am. And they have no interest in having me be unhappy. So apart from those instincts, which I'm relating to my own personal circumstances, what Hardy is pointing to are larger things, whether that's inequality in education, family circumstances, personality, that a mother is able to observe these things. She wants her son to be happy. She doesn't think this marriage will be good, and she explains why. And yet, Yeobright, who seems to be bright in other areas, gets pulled in to this relationship, makes a bad marriage, and ultimately, you could say, somewhat ruins his life, but there's redemption at the end of the story. And Interestingly, like Great Expectations, Hardy gives us two different endings. I will tell you which ending I prefer only because I don't want to tell you what the ending is. I want you to read the novel yourself. But I took a different path than I did with the ending for Great Expectations. That there was an ending of Great Expectations that I am firmly committed to because Dickens provided two for those as well. I took one particular ending as the ending, and I went a different direction on this one. So you may not be consistent in the way that you want novels to resolve themselves. And I think partially that's related to the characters that you're looking at. The other theme, so if we're talking about good marriages and bad marriages and what we're talking about in literature, is the call of home. So Yobright has spent years in Paris working for a jeweler. And that is part of why Eustacia, who would become his wife, is attracted to him. He has this allure. Oh, he's lived in Paris and maybe will move back to Paris. And that classic idea of him telling her, I'm not going to do this, and her thinking, oh, that's fine, I'll change him. And then finding out, oh no, he's not to be changed. And then to sit on that bitter disappointment. That despite the allurements of Paris, Yobright prefers his small heath. And to give that context for those who are not familiar with Dorset or not familiar with England, this would be not even considered a town. This is just wilderness, countryside with houses here and there. If you'd find a couple houses together, that would be, a kind of neighborhood. So he's still drawn to his native land. He has such a love for it, a love for his mother, his family, that Paris, whatever, it doesn't matter. The opposite is true of his wife. Eustacia is always dreaming of what could be this other place. And that's a tension I think that Hardy wants us to explore as well. Being happy where you are and being able to go out into the world and still dream of coming back to your native place, unattractive as it may be to the world. And those people who can never be happy where they are, they dream of someplace else. And even when it's clear that they're not going to achieve that dream, they consign themselves to unhappiness in the place where they are. And that isn't to say for people not to have dreams, but it's important to realize that when you are in certain circumstances, it's important for you to take joy in those circumstances. There's a reason God placed you there, and maybe that will change in the future for whatever reason. But you don't make your life any easier by hating where you are and where you're from. There's great consolation in loving where you're from. And that's, I think, something that Hardy brings through in much of his work, but particularly here. So, Return of the Native, one of my few, I suppose, these days, reviews of novels. I have not been reviewing many novels lately. Maybe this will be a sign that I'll be coming back and reviewing it, but definitely in my lane as someone who has an undergraduate degree in literature. This is right up my alley, or right up my street, as they would say in England. Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy. I will put a link to this Signet Classic edition. I love these. They're sturdy and they're inexpensive. I'll put a link, but I'll also probably put a link to the Penguin. As those of you longtime watchers and listeners of the channel know, I'm a Penguin person. So I'll put a link to that in the description. Whatever edition you buy, buying it will help support the work of this channel. So thank you for that. If you already have a copy of the book or you want to support me in a free way, hit like or subscribe. Share this with other people who might be Hardy curious. Not the Hardy Boys, obviously, but Thomas Hardy, or curious about English literature. I think this is as good a place to start with Hardy as anywhere. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, there are links to PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee below. If you'd like to get early releases of videos like this one, as well as an exclusive once-a-month video, which will tell you what I'm working on, what I'm thinking about, and other things, there are links to Patreon and YouTube membership. Whichever platform you prefer, you can choose, and you'll get the same access. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, my Amazon wish list is linked below. You'll see some books on Palestine in that wish list. That's for my Palestine bookshelf project. Feel free to pop over there and look at what I'm doing if you're interested. But the books that are not on Palestine are for this channel. So pick one of them, buy it, send it my way, and I will do my best to review it in a timely manner. And I'm happy to mention you. Although that seems to be the case that people tend to buy these anonymously and don't mention themselves, which I'm grateful for, but that means I can't thank them by name, but I can still thank them anonymously when I do those reviews. Until next time, enjoy your reading.